A very good morning, everybody. Deadlock. Deadlock is one of the most important parts in database management system. When we talk about deadlock in our practical life, we can tell it as a traffic jam. When we have a very severe traffic jam, what we do? We take the vehicles backward, make the way for other vehicles. Similar wise, we are going to work with the deadlock. Deadlock is a situation in the system when the system gets hanged, the resources are less, and the request that we get or the request the system that handles is higher than the resources in the system. Now, deadlock is a condition where two or more tasks are waiting for each other in order to be finished, but none of the tasks is willing to give up the resources on other task needs. Now, in this situation, what happens? No task can get finished and is in a waiting state forever. Now, let us have a look to the diagram. In this, we have resources R1, then resources R2. In this, we can see that process P1 holds the resource R2 and requires R1, while process P2 holds the resource R1 and requires R2. Now, proceeding further, let us know about Kaufman conditions for deadlock. Kaufman was a scientist who worked with various issues of database management system, transaction system, and he gave 4 conditions for deadlock. A deadlock may occur if all the following condition holds true. The first condition, mutual exclusion condition. There must be at least one resource that cannot be used by more than one process at a time. Hold and wait. A process that is holding a resource can request for additional resources that are being held by other processes in the system. No preemption condition. A resource cannot be forcibly taken from a process. Only the process can release a resource that is being held by it. Circular wait condition. A condition where one process is waiting for a resource that is being held by second process, and the second process is waiting for the third process, and so on, and the last process is waiting for the first process, thus making a circular chain of waiting. Now, these are the 4 conditions which are necessary for a deadlock to occur. Now, how do we handle the deadlock? Let us know about ostrich algorithm. Now that means ignore the deadlock. Now, ignoring a deadlock, how ignoring a deadlock can come under deadlock handling? Now, we need to understand that Windows which we are using on our system uses this approach of deadlock handling, and that is the reason sometimes it hangs up. and we have to reboot the system to get it working. Not only Windows, but Unix also uses this approach, ostrich algorithm, that is ignore the deadlock. Now let us understand why instead of dealing with deadlock, they ignore it and why it is being called as ostrich algorithm. This is known as ostrich algorithm because in this approach, we ignore the deadlock and pretend that it would never occur, just like ostrich behavior, to stick one's hand in the sand and pretend there is no problem. Now, why we ignore it? When it is believed that deadlocks are very rare and cost of handling the deadlock is higher, in that case, ignoring is better solution than handling it. Now, for example, let us take an example. If the time required for handling the deadlock is higher than the time requiring rebooting the Windows, then rebooting would be preferred choice considering that deadlocks are very rare in Windows. Now deadlock detection. Resource scheduler is one that keeps the track of resources allocated to and requested by the processors. Thus, there is a deadlock. It is known to the resource scheduler. Now, this is how the deadlock is detected. That means the resource scheduler detects the deadlock. Once a deadlock is detected, it is being corrected by the following methods. Terminating the process that is involved in deadlock, terminating all the processes involved in deadlock, or terminating process one by one until deadlock is resolved can be the solution. But both of these approaches are not good. Terminating all processes cost high and partial work done by the processes gets lost. Terminating one by one task requires lot of time because each time a process is terminated, it needs to check whether the deadlock is resolved or not. Thus, the best approach is considering process age and priority while terminating them during a deadlock condition. Resource algorithm. We call it resource preemption. Another approach can be preemption of resources and allocating them to the other processes until the deadlock is resolved. Now let us have a look to deadlock prevention. Now we know that all the four Kaufman conditions, if it holds true, then a deadlock occurs. So preventing one or more of them could prevent the deadlock. Removing the mutual exclusion. That means all the resources must be shareable. That means at a time more than one processor can get a hold of resources. That approach is practically impossible. Removing hold and wait condition. This can be removed if the process acquires all the resources that are needed before starting out. Another way to remove this to enforce a rule of requesting resource when there are none in held by the process. Preemption of resources. Preemption of resources from a process can result in rollback, and thus this needs to be avoided in order to maintain the consistency and stability of the system. Avoid circular weight condition. This can be avoided if the resources are maintained in a hierarchy and process can hold the resources in increasing order of precedence. This avoids circular weight. Now another way of doing this to force one resources per process rule. A process can request for a resource once it releases the resource currently being held by the current process. This avoids the circular weight. Now these are the methods, the 4 methods which we implement for deadlock prevention. Talking about deadlock avoidance, deadlock can be avoided if resources are allocated in such a way that it avoids the deadlock occurrence. There are 2 algorithms for deadlock avoidance: wait and wait or die, und wait. Now here is the table representation of the resource allocation for each algorithm. Now both of these algorithms take process age into consideration while determining the best possible way of resource allocation for deadlock avoidance. Older process needs a resource held by the younger process. Now in this wait or die, older process waits, younger process dies. Younger process needs a resource held by older process. In this, younger process dies, and then, or we can say that younger process waits. Now these are the process and the methods which we process or which we work while we are working with the deadlock. Deadlock is a common issue which we face in our operating system, where we find our system or application or mobile being hung up. That means when they are being hung up, that means they are requesting for a resource and the resource are not being allotted to them, or the processor of the system is allotted to some other resources and they are working on that, and it moves in a circular way, and then the situation and the question comes for deadlock. Deadlock is a situation for where the system stops proceeding further. Now in our next chapters we will also be working with concurrency control.